Well, hello everyone. I honestly can't quite believe we're here in this building for many reasons. First off, we have a building and we have a museum in it. Secondly, it looks completely different to what it did a week ago, which is a huge help. We've had an amazing team of volunteers who've come and spent basically a solid week working on this project. We've had an even bigger number of people who have donated and supported so we can actually get this to where it is today. It's by no means the final result. It will continue being developed as we go, and hopefully today you'll get a bit of an idea of the potential of this place and where we are, where our vision is as to where it will go in the future. We have a total of about 75 people booked in today. They're not all turning up at the same time. People will flit in and out. We do have a full day program, so we have got stuff going on the whole day, but don't feel obliged to stay. We have got breaks throughout the day, and people can go and have a browse downstairs or whatever. This is roughly what we're looking at in terms of our schedule. I'm doing a sort of a short welcome now, and we'll be introducing Diane in just a second. John Mackay has got a presentation. The good news is that I had allocated about half an hour to John's presentation because we know what John's like. It turns out he sent me through. He was supposed to be zooming in live to do a presentation. Unfortunately, he's on the road, so he can't do that. So he sent me through a video, and it's 10 minutes long. So it's significantly shorter than I was expecting, but that's fine. It's still a really fascinating look at a bit of the history of creation research, as well as a history of the Christian heritage of museums around the world. After we've done that, basically we're going to, depending on how many people we have at that point, we're going to split into two groups. Diane Eager and Josh. Where's Josh? Up the back there. One of our helpers is going to take one group downstairs and have a look at some of the fossils and displays and exhibits downstairs, while I'm going to take a group upstairs around up here and discuss some of the stuff that we have up here. Then we'll have a break for lunch. There was obviously refreshments at that point as well, but hopefully you've brought a packed lunch with you, or there's plenty of places you can get food from around here. So we'll have a bit of a break for lunch and just have a bit of a chance to chat and have a wander around yourself and see what you can find. And then basically after lunch, those groups will swap over for another look around. To finish up the evening or the afternoon, Diane is going to give us a run through some of the other museum projects that we have around the world. Diane, do you want to just introduce yourself and a bit about your role at Creation Research? Because you've been here a little while now.
Yes, I have been here for a while. I came to the UK to go to the Fossil Conference down on the south coast. That was wonderful. And then I've been back here helping with the preparation for this with our marvellous team of volunteers. They really have been absolutely brilliant. So yes, I live in Australia and I work for Creation Research. I do a lot of the background research and writing for our newsletters and for our presentations, and I also give lectures on biological topics.
Yeah. You're also going to be running down through some of the research things that we've done in our museums, a bit more about the background to the museum, some of the stuff about Jurassic Ark and stuff like that as well, aren't you?
Yes, yes. If you get any of our literature or read our websites, you will have heard of our Jurassic Ark site, so I'm going to give you a run through Jurassic Ark.
Now, it'll be good. I'm looking forward to it. And then finally, we're going to finish off with, we may have another break at some point in there, depending on how we're all going, and get some more tea and coffee. But basically, we're going to finish the day off with a shorter sort of discussion with me. And also, we've got a video from Sam, who's one of our young workers, who's coming in to help us and look at some of the future projects, both with the documentaries, the DVDs, future conventions, obviously the museum and all of that, and get the bit of the big vision going forward. Throughout the day, you will hopefully get a bit of a bigger idea as to what we're trying to do here at the museum, not just as a museum, but also a facility for Christians and for non-Christians, a place which is evangelistic, as well as something that is it helps with discipleship as well. And so if you want to support or feel led to support, you will find that there is details about the Creation Research Trust on your seats. Creation Research Trust is our main legal group in the UK who is a charity, looks after a lot of the finances, and is able to, they're fully committed to supporting me, John, Diane, the museum project and everything like that in the UK. So that's the best way of being able to actually support. We have two of our trustees here today, and I'll get them to, I'll point them out to you a little bit later as we carry on with the discussions. All right, very quickly, I've got one last little thing to show you before we have a look at what John's been sending us. So here is a picture taken about 10 years ago. It's a picture of John there. You'll probably recognize him, and a very young me. I was 16 years old. I just finished home education. I had just started a university degree, a bachelor's in science. And I really felt led and called to some kind of ministry. Didn't know when, didn't know how, didn't know even really why. Had a very troubling time for a few months. Stressing about what I was going to do or try and do. In fact, this was actually just before I started my degree, because a very blessed brother came on board and basically took me aside and said, look, if you're really called to this ministry, if this is really from God, then why are you struggling on your own? Why are you trying to do it by yourself? Surely, if this is from God, he'll provide the way. You just actually need to make sure you're following Christ. Because at the time, I was a Christian, but I wasn't doing the things that a Christian should do. I wasn't following Christ. I wasn't praying every day. I wasn't reading the Bible. I was just kind of plodding along. So no wonder I was in a bit of a stress. And so I ended up starting to get my life back on track. Started actually following and praying and listening to God. And as a result of that, in about 3 months, I had started a university program, been offered a placement at university. I'd been given my first job, which was that as a zookeeper, because I needed to pay for university. And I met this guy here, John. And we'd started putting things on display in our house. We had a little extension built off the side of our house, which was supposed to be a kind of homeschool learning room type thing, right? And it very quickly ended up being the fossil storage area. I've been told by my wife that I must keep all fossil storage areas to this building now and not any part of the house. But there we go. We'd started putting stuff on display. As you can see behind us, we've just started piling up fossils and artifacts and gems and also, and inviting people around, local people from our church, inviting people around and actually discussing things. And our first real major fossil that we ended up getting was this one. It's a crocodile skull. In fact, you can actually see the crocodile skull just over, still at the back there. It's the very same one. And I thought this was fantastic. Wrote a great big article about it, put it up on our website, which was very basic back then. Still is not hugely basic, but I was ready to take on the world with this little teeny tiny museum. And when I met John, one thing that became very evident is we both had the same thoughts as regards to what the future of creation museums and creation research museums in the UK should look like. We're not talking about a great big Hollywood style, Ken Ham style museum. We're talking about something that is a facility for Christians and non-Christians. It's a place to spread the good news of Jesus Christ, and it's a place to disciple people. It's a place where the Bible comes to life. It's a place where people can come and actively engage in research and get up close and personal with real artifacts, with real fossils, with real things. And as Diane will tell you, God is the God of the real world, and so we want to make sure that there's a part of that real world that reflects God's nature, because God has stamped his nature into all of creation, as it says in the book of Romans. And very shortly after, I ended up doing this, giving my first ever talk with John Mackay at a homeschool group. Few people there, was nervous as anything, but I got through it. And then a few days later, we led our first field trip to Hunstanton, and I've been leading a field trip to Hunstanton every single year, bar COVID years, ever since. And things began to grow, and we began to redesign the museum, get some bigger fossils. We ended up calling it the Genesis Museum of Creation. And eventually it became the Genesis Museum of Creation Research. And that is still what we're kind of calling this little part of the museum upstairs. The Creation Research Centre is much bigger than just a museum. And we push these things, some Bible verses. The works of the Lord are great, studied by all who have pleasure in them. We want to study the works of the Lord, and the works of the Lord is not just a salvation, it's also his creation. And we do this, we study these works so that people may see and know, may consider and understand together that the hand of the Lord has done this the Holy One of Israel has created it. We want people to realize that it's Jesus Christ who is the creator. And finally, a fun little verse, Psalm 148, verse 7. If you open up your King James Version, it says, "Praise the Lord from the earth, you dragons." And yes, we can talk about dragons and dinosaurs and all that kind of stuff, but we want to make sure that everything that's inside this building praises the Lord, points towards Jesus Christ. Well, we'll talk a little bit later about our future vision. We'll talk a little bit more about what we're wanting this place to be, and obviously a lot more about the actual fossils and artifacts. But for now, let's play a video by John Mackay, a short little video, about 10 minutes long, giving you a bit of background to creation research, as well as to the history, the Christian heritage of museums around the world.
G'day from the creation guy John Mackay down under on this very special event up over. It's really a project that began some 40 years ago when the Lord first called me to England, and I began collecting and filling up friendly people by the way, filling up their basements and their attics and using church storerooms. And now you've got a museum. Young Joseph, the Lord has raised up, and he's heading up the project. And thank you to Joe and to all the folks over there who's jumped in and they're helping him. My job is to give you a little bit of background on museums and their importance. I guess I better start at a personal level, but it's to do with this DVD, The World of Living Fossils. Now, this is the oldest video. You'll see a very young John Mackay there. Not John Mackay, the fossil guy, but John Mackay, a young, very enthusiastic geologist who's convinced by fossils. Living fossils. You see this fossil here? A beautiful specimen I got in Germany. It's actually a cycad. And we know that because, you see, I brought it home from Germany and I went and I got a cycad from my backyard, put the two together, and you can see the cycads are still producing their own kind. Now, that's the point at which, when I became aware of that, I ceased being an evolutionist, swapped over quite a few years later to believing literal creation. The history and the importance? Well, I got a call from an American geologist who spoke in a very broad Tennessee accent, and he said, "John, we need something to give a geologist in South America." And the background, because I can't keep mimicking that all the time, the background was a missionary had contacted him and said, "I've been witnessing to this young geologist doing his PhD, and I can't get through to him. We can't get past page 1 in Genesis. He's stuck with evolution. Help." So help came from South America to Tennessee to Australia, and we said, let's pray, let's give him the DVD. Now, to cut a long story short, that young man who graduated with his doctorate became a Christian as a result, and ended up being an open door into universities in England. And it ended up with me finding out some very interesting things about museums and the history. I mean, in geology, and I'm sure you can see these fossils in the hall tonight. Look at what they're there. Look at some of the explanations. They're fantastic. But this is one I first came across because Nicholas Steno had recognised that if it looks like a shark's teeth, it's probably a shark's tooth. Now, you say that's such an obvious thing, but it's not in a world governed by pagan, Greek, metaphysical concepts. They didn't believe sharks' teeth were actually fossils, and neither did most of the church leaders at the time. The church leaders did what they often do, swallow the most popular philosophy. So there was no point in having a fossil museum, because you didn't believe they were anything apart from tricks played by the gods. But Nicholas Steno put an end to that. But following him, a young man then by the name of John Woodward, who wrote a book on Towards a Natural History of the Earth. Now, John Woodward was a Christian, there's no doubt about it, but he's your first professor of geology in Cambridge. Okay, my connection? Well, you see, this young geologist from South America had invited me to England. I got to know other geologists, and one of them had said, listen, you'd be interested in seeing all of the collection of John Woodward. He left a little note in his will saying that if you want to see these, John Woodward, Nicholas Steno is 1659, John Woodward is 1695. That's how I remember them, nice and easy. And so John Woodward's collection was available to anybody who asked to see it. So yours truly, Australians, being polite and all of that, we're pretty blunt actually, said, can I go and see it? So I got to see John Woodward's original collection, bequeathed to Cambridge University, became a museum. And if you read his book, Towards a Natural History, a Natural Theory of the Earth, it is biblical creation. It is Noah's flood. It is catastrophic geology producing the fossils and preserving them, because you see, this fossil had to be buried quickly or it'd simply rot and decay. The same is true for beautiful fossils like this. That fossil fern had to be quickly buried. That fossil fern had to be preserved really fast. So John Woodward, who took up Stomastino's ideas, was actually the most influential person in the history of geology in England. It got to be a firm basis that you could believe in creation, you could believe in Noah's flood, and it showed in the rocks. But he set aside a bequest and it became a museum. If you want to see it, by the way, it's now stored in the Sedgwick Museum. It's still there, it's still got that proviso. Okay, now why does that matter? Because if you have a look at the biggest museum in the world, basically the one set up in London, the man who ran it, he set it up to show the glory of God in creation. The Bible verses that are there, the pictures, it was set up to honour the God who created all things. Richard Owen also invented the word dinosaur. And beyond a shadow of a doubt, he was convinced dinosaurs were the monsters God made. So the museum movement that really comes out of England, which we are now a long-term part of, actually began with a biblical basis, a creation basis, a creator basis, and a Noah's flood basis. Now, we don't apologise, that's what this new museum has a basis in. But you see, the influence of Sir Richard Owen spread around the world in making museums after their own kind. You go to Christchurch, and you'll see a museum with a Bible verse on the front facade there. These are his works, quoting from the book of Job. And there was an article in the ABC News here in Australia just the other day, all about how when the first evolutionist curator was appointed to our Sydney Natural History Museum, who was a special friend of Charles Darwin, he couldn't win against the creationists. So the first museums in Australia had a firm creation foundation. In fact, even my university, you walked into the science department and it had "Let there be light." Or you just stood out. Even if you didn't come from a church background like me, you found that you had a biblical framework in any of the display centres that were set up throughout the Western world. Okay, come closer. You see, when we have a look at the museum we're setting up tonight, I want to encourage you to get beyond young Joe in prayer, in practice, and in funding, and in personal support. Get involved, and you'll find that we're reversing the trend. Because what's happened, Charles Lyell and Charles Darwin have taken over museums. You almost need a set of blindfolds to actually see the writing that's there and blank it out, and then you need to take them off to see what the actual evidence is. Because the two things are different. Oh yes, they'll talk all about my fossil cycad, and then they'll tell you how it's evolved. But the evidence is cycads have always been cycads. They have not evolved. So we're sold a story in museums today. So can I encourage you, Joe and team, hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, tell the truth. Show them exactly what fossils you find. You've got a heap of mine over there. I'm sure you'll talk to them about that. And in reality, you people who are there, pray for the museum, pray for the project. It's part of reaching out to the whole of England. People are fascinated by these displays. We run several displays here in Australia. We have Jurassic Ark. We have the museum just out in Tasmania, down north of Launceston. And it's great to have unbelievers come in and say, wow, I've never seen this in my life. It's great for them to go one step further and even become a Christian. Why would that follow on? Well, for the same reason it followed on with a young geologist who was so opposed to the missionary in South America. You see, the evidence points to the glory of God as creator. That's quite a biblical position. Romans chapter 1 says the evidence is so clear, you can all see it, you can all understand it. In fact, it's so easy to follow, God will use it against a person on Judgment Day. Okay, one last thing. We have been really privileged over the years to know God's call to England, and to see it, even in COVID. Haven't been able to get over there for 3 years. Bless you all for praying for us and supporting us. But I'd like to encourage you to realise young Joe has started ministry in just about no support at all, except what's coming from Australia. Can I encourage you to realise what it costs to run some of these museums? Yes, I know you see pretty buildings all finished, but at the moment, even here in Australia, we sent Joe, £1,000 a week for the last month to get some of this underway, and he raised £4,000 just locally. Can I encourage you, get behind him, support him, in fact, support him magnificently, because our God will provide all your needs. Now, that's what Paul said to his supporters. Give generously, because our God also is watching what you do. Can I encourage you again, get behind Joe, get behind Sarah Ann, get behind Diane who's there, get behind all the people who are involved intimately in the project, pray for them and support them. Well, I pray you have a wonderful day over there on this Saturday. May God bless you and keep you, and I look forward to getting a visual report myself.
So, it gives you a little bit of a background. John's mentioned a few things there as regards to the background of the museum project, as well as he mentioned the vision of the project going forward. This is not just a museum here in Oswestry. It's not just a museum that will reach out to the local community. It's not just a museum that is in a, quite frankly, a prime location in terms of access for most of the country. Within about we are within about 3 hours drive of most of the population of the UK. We're just over 3 hours to London. We're 3.5 to 4 hours into Scotland to Glasgow. We're about an hour away from Manchester, hour and a half away from Birmingham. It's kind of as prime as you can get to get access from everywhere. But it's so much more than that. The idea is that this building will facilitate, and I keep using that word facilitate, and that's really what we see ourselves as in many ways, a facilitating ministry. But it will facilitate the presence of multiple creation discovery centres around the UK, where churches or a group of local churches can actually end up hosting a mini creation research museum, a mini display, as we send out exhibits and artefacts and things from our collection that we've put together. So there's a much, much bigger vision than what you can just see here. And the Lord has blessed us abundantly with fossils and artifacts and research opportunities. So we've got a huge amount to cover today in terms of looking around and seeing. A few very quick housekeeping things, just so you give you a bit of a perspective and know where you are today, before we kind of start splitting people up. Most of you, I believe, have found coffee and tea. You all know where that is? Good. As you went into the room where the coffee and tea was, you may have noticed that there's a set of steps on the left-hand side. If you need the bathroom, you go up those steps, follow the landing round, you'll see the bathroom straight in front of you. We'll leave the light on, just because it's a bit of a dull day today, and because the landing light doesn't currently work. So leave the light on even when you're finished in the toilet. Just up those steps, follow the landing round, and feel free to use the bathroom at any point that you need. We are having a lunch break, as I've mentioned. Hopefully most of you have brought packed lunch of some description. If you do need food, there's a Sainsbury's literally just over there. It's a minute, less than a minute's walk away. So go and grab food if you need food from there. But there are going to be refreshments and stuff that we're going to lay out, cakes and some nibbles and so on and so forth during the lunchtime. We are going to need to, just as a matter of practicality, split the groups up, just so because we want to give you a personal feel of the museum, of the artifacts and so on and so forth. And we're a big believer in hands-on, aren't we, Diane? So what we're going to do now, let's just get a few hands waving. Joshy up the back, do you want to come up here? So this is Josh. And he's come on board as one of our helpers. So it's actually going to be Josh and Diane who are going to take group A or B, a group, downstairs through some of the bigger fossils, through some of the animals, through some of the dinosaur things we have down there. And obviously there's a chance, it's slightly fewer exhibits down there, so there is actually a chance to be able to have a look around the shop as well. But also give you an idea, because this is in development. So there's a research area down there, which is currently hidden out of the way, but they'll tell you about the research and some of the stuff that we're planning to do there. There is a cinema room downstairs, which is also full of stuff, and it's hidden out the way. And there's a courtyard downstairs, which is also full of, you get the picture. We had to kind of dump stuff just to try and get stuff clear as we go through this week. But they'll give you a bit of a perspective of what the future of downstairs looks like, because the downstairs really is the facilitating part of the centre. Up here is the museum part of the centre. And up here, obviously, you can see we've got most of the artefacts and the fossils. Roughly, generally speaking, we've got fossils on that side, artefacts on that side, but I'll have a go at taking you around and showing you some of the displays and stuff like that. There'll be chances for questions as we go. We'll probably won't have this. We're going to have a specific Q&A time and discussion time towards the end of this day. But during the tours, if you want to ask questions, I'm happy with just people raising hands and asking questions or shouting out or heckling or whatever you want to do. But don't throw rocks, yeah. Plenty of them around if you're inclined to do. But anyway, so we'll take people around and do some of the sort of discussions and stuff like that. So what I'm going to ask then, if we can have row 1, 2, 3, and row 1, 2, and 3 and 4, starting from the back forwards. If you'd like to head downstairs now, Diane and Josh will go down with you. As you're going, David, can you give us a wave? David is one of our trustees. Ed, can you give us a wave? Ed's one of our trustees as well. If you want to find out more about the trust at any point during the day, go and speak to them, but we'll talk more about the trust and the work that it does a little bit later. So 1, 2, 3 rows if you want to head downstairs, and the rest of us up here will start working our way around the museum.